everyone. My name is John Barry, and I'm chairing the session of Honorary Fellows, and we will be addressing the issue past, present, and future of cross-cultural psychology. This symposium has been organized as a way of celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology in 1972 in Hong Kong. There are three components to this symposium. The first, which will take about half of the time, is a set of presentations by 11 honorary fellows who will address this topic. Then there will be breakout rooms. There will be 4 rooms, each with a chair, and this will give an opportunity to discuss the issues raised by the 11 honorary fellows, and this will be followed by 20 minutes of general discussion. And so the sequence of presentations will be myself first, immediately following this introduction, then Janak Pandey, Michael Bond, Walt Launer, Debbie Best, Michelle Gelfand, David Matsumoto, Ipa Purtingha, Peter Smith, Marshall Siegel, and Colleen Ward. They will follow without interruption this introduction. The 4 breakout rooms have been designed to allow participants who are not presenters to engage in more intimate interactions with the fellows. And fellows have not prepared any remarks. They will simply interact with the participants with attempting to get their questions and comments all addressed. Fellows have been assigned to 4 different rooms as listed there. Janak, Michael, and Marshall in one room, Colleen, Walt in the second, Ipa and David in the third, and myself, Michelle Gelfand, and Debbie Best in the 4th. After these breakout rooms have finished, each chair will report on the main issues discussed and conclusions that may have been drawn for a very brief period, around 2 minutes each. And then we'll have open discussions for the last 25 minutes for all of the audience to participate. And then, if appropriate, I will make a few closing remarks as chair of this symposium. We now begin the 11 honorary fellow presentations. The first presentation in the list is by me, and so I don't say again who I am. I'm John Barry, but I should also add that I'm from Queen's University in Canada. And of course, the topic, the past, present, and future of cross-cultural psychology is much too broad to address in the 4 minutes we have each been allotted. So I'm going to concentrate on the early history, the past, on the activities that led up to the founding of the association. In the 1960s, many of us who were working in the field became aware of the work of others. This wasn't easy, of course, because there was no internet, and travel was much more difficult than it is at present. And so there was a need to try to find each other. So some journal articles began to appear and book chapters that attempted to conceptualize and empirically examine the role of culture in the development and display of human behavior. Some discussions were enabled by these conferences that were held in Ibadan, in Nigeria, in Hawaii, in the USA, and Istanbul, Turkey, from 1968 to 1971. These established first-person contact, which had not generally been able to do in previous years. At about the same time, 2 journals were established in the field. The International Journal of Psychology was established in 1966 by the International Union of Psychological Science, and Walt Launer established the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology in 1970. And these publishing opportunities brought together scholars who shared this common focus and allowed us to present our ideas and research in a concrete published form. Individuals who attended these conferences and who were publishing in these journals came to be identified as this nascent field on the name cross-cultural psychology. In the late 1960s, I invited as many of these people that I could identify to participate in the directory of cross-cultural psychology. The first issue of this directory was published in 1969 in the International Journal of Psychology, and later I teamed up with Walt Launer to produce two subsequent and much expanded directories. These directories allowed each person to identify themselves, their subject area of interest, their cultural area of interest, and the directory cross-tabulated these so that people could identify each other. And of course, this was all done by airmail, long before email made this task, or would have made this task easier. These activities provided a basis for a proposal by John Dawson, who was with me earlier at the University of Edinburgh. Subsequently, we shared the positions in the Department of Psychology at the University of Sydney. John went on to Hong Kong to take the inaugural chair of psychology. He made a proposal in the newsletter of cross-cultural psychology. This proposal can actually be seen in the introductory article to the special issue that will be published in JCCP in August. And the conference was held over a 4-day period. We had a lot of opportunities to meet each other, and about 120 of us collected from nearly 20 countries. The proceedings of that conference were edited by John Dawson and Walt Launer and published by the University of Hong Kong Press in 1973. The rest, they say, is our history, and we are now 50 years old and thriving, and we are celebrating, and I want to give congratulations all around.
I'm grateful to Professor John Berry and Walt Launer for inviting me to participate in Honorary Fellow Symposium on the occasion of the Golden Jubilee Congress of IACCP. India has played a very important role right from the inception in development of IACCP. India's leading academics, Professor R. Rath and Professor Anand Lakshmi, were present when IACCP was founded in 1972 in Hong Kong. Since then, participation of Indian scholars have increased in conferences. They were present in good number in Kingston, in Tilburg, and in Munich. The 5th Congress was held in Bhubaneswar and was organized by Professor Rath. At that time, Professor D. Sinha was the president of IACCP. I would like to summarize in 4 stages participation of Indian scholars in research. In the first stage, that is the beginning of the 20th century, many studies were, some studies were done. One famous study is by Rivers on perceptual processes, and India was one of the location of these studies, and that studies demonstrated the perceptual and processes across culture. The second example of that kind of a study is a study by Whiting and Whiting. They were the Harvard anthropologists who planned their study, and India was one of the sites. This is the famous 6 culture study. In the second stage of such kind of collaboration is the stage in which studies were planned by Western scholars and executed in various parts of the world. One example I would like to say, John Williams and Deborah Best studies of late 70s, early 80s on sex trait stereotypes. The third stage is that Indian scholars and the Western scholars started coming together. They interacted and they developed certain projects and executed it collaboratively, in real collaborative sense. One example is the study of by R.C. Mishra, Durganand Sinha, and John Berry. This study was on ecology, acculturation, and psychological adaptation of Adivasis in Bihar. Now I'm talking about the fourth stage, and that fourth stage is the stage of cultural psychology and indigenous psychology, when local scholars develop their studies and collaborate with other colleagues to study various social psychological phenomena. I think that shows the maturity. My personal view is that future lies in development of indigenous and cultural psychology in various contexts of the world, and that will provide maturity for meaningful comparative studies, and that will provide a real maturity to cross-cultural psychology research, and that will show the maturity of cross-cultural movement. So I conclude that gradually we have moved to a stage that indigenous scholars, local scholars have developed their competence, their ability for quality research that needs to be encouraged, and that encouragement will allow flowering of psychology all over the world, and that will allow meaningful comparative study of psychology, and that will lead to real development of psychology, which we may call universal psychology. Thank you. This was my brief presentation in this session.
This is Michael Bond. I'm addressing the topic of the future for cross-cultural psychology as I see it from Hong Kong in 2022. I will focus on opportunities, concerns, hopes. Opportunities symbolized by the eagle taking off. For one, we have access to populations around the world through Qualtrics-type surveys and analysis of big data from web footprints left by these individuals, and also textual analysis that we can access over the web. We also have available to us multinational data sets from representative populations, and these may help us to address the generalizability challenge in cross-cultural psychology. Sophisticated statistical tools are available for cross-cultural level analysis, cross-level analysis, and also incentive systems are growing to help in publishing our research. Concerns, however, as symbolized by the eagle nesting his or her eaglets, culture wars and political correctness as disincentives for pursuing a career in cross-cultural psychology seem to be rampant and would interfere with much research we might wish to do, for example, research on genetic differences across cultural groups. The quality of training for doing cross-cultural research is, it seems to me, inadequate to meet current standards for publishing in
the better journals. Finally, continuing use of bicultural comparison demonstrations of hypotheses, as opposed to what I think we need to improve and enhance is theorizing and research testing about why and how multicultural groups differ from one another. Dominance of focus on nations as cultures is inadequate. And I believe we should be extending research on culture into the domain of families as cultures, teams, firms, or corporations, both within and across cultures. Finally, hopes as symbolized by the eagle taking off for the 21st century. I'm hoping that a 21st century focus on human rights will promote provision of more resources for funding, education, training, and research on cross-cultural psychological processes and their outcomes, processes and outcomes. I hope that psychology associations in every nation will provide postdoctorate training for doing and writing up better research on cross-cultural psychology in the English language. I hope that more cross-cultural studies of psychology will be focused on other types of cultural groups like families, teams, schools, and firms, as I mentioned before. Finally, increased focus on existential threats and practical solutions would make our research more useful for the world at large. So this is my view of the future from over here, which of course for you is over there. And symbolized by this picture, we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face, as written in the New Testament of Corinthians. So I propose that we discuss our future together at IACCP 2022. And I look forward to your inputs following using mine as stimulation for your own thinking. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Walt Launer. I am the founding editor of the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology and also the special issues editor. I also am the originator and the editor of the founding editor of the online readings in psychology and culture. My first order of business in this brief presentation is to give my profound thanks to everyone who's been associated with the journal. That includes 8 editors after me, including the present editor, Davy Best, and the incoming editor, number 9, Sylvia Chen. Also to the 30 to 40 people who have served as associate editors, my profound thanks, as well as the 300 or so consulting editors. It's been a very interesting ride. I think the journal has made its effect. It's proven its worth. I would like to be around for this diamond anniversary of the journal, but that's not to be. In fact, at my age, it's good to be kind of anywhere. But the diamond anniversary, forget it. I also want to thank those people involved with the online readings in psychology and culture, including current editor Michael Bender and his and the 4 or 5 associate editors who are doing a fantastic job. And I urge all of you, students, faculty, anyone, to pay close attention to the online readings, which is a fantastic way to get involved with the teaching of cross-cultural psychology And I think it is, like the journal, I hope, here to stay for a long time. I'm especially pleased that things have turned out so well after the unexpected sale of the journal that was copyrighted by Western Washington University for a long time, when it was bought by Sage Publications in 2004. That sale resulted in the association being sort of financially out of the woods. And I think that it has done marvelous things to the journal despite having lost the complete control of it. But fortunately, we all can rest assured that the journal will be in the hands of of IACCP until one or both no longer appears. So in that vein, thank you, Vane. I welcome you to the party, and I hope everyone has a good time. I would like to be with you and raise a glass of wine, but that's not to be. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Debbie Best. I am one of the Honorary Fellows you'll be hearing from today. And I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts about things past, present, and future relative to IACCP and my area of interest, which is developmental psychology. My very first IACCP conference was in Bhubaneswar, India in 1980. And I was struck by the fact that there were very few visible women at that conference, and I did not see officers that were women. I had been attending the Society for Research in Child Development conferences for many years as a developmental psychologist, so I was used to seeing women in those positions. So it struck me as a little unusual, but I was delighted 6 years after that first conference to see Ruth Monroe become the first woman Secretary General, and then a few years later, Cheatham Kachibasi became the first president, 18 years after the beginning of IACCP in 1972. 10 years after Cheatham had been president, we got our second woman president, me. But my involvement with IACCP really has been longer and stronger through JCCP, the Journal of Cross Cultural. I became a consulting editor in 1989, and I did that job for 6 years, and then I was an associate editor for 16 years, and then since 2012, I have been editor-in-chief. So I have been with the journal for 32 years, consistently, continuously, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. It has helped me learn and grow and understand how the field has been changing. As a developmental psychologist, I was for many years the only associate editor, and I was kept busy, but I often got articles from the editor that were not quite developmental. I remember one of my favorite was on water management from a cross-cultural perspective, and Franz van de Viber, who was the editor-in-chief, sent it to me saying, well, he'd just send me all kinds of weird things because, after all, developmental covers many areas. But right now, as the journal has grown over the years, we have had one full-time developmental associate editor, and we're getting ready with our new board coming in. We're getting ready to have the equivalent of one full-time developmental person and two part-time. They are part-time in the sense that they are clinical and developmental, so they can handle both kinds of papers. So the developmental area is growing in cross-cultural. Developmental has, for long years, recognized the interest of the interesting differences in the developmental context of children, but we've not really paid attention to it closely. And this is quite obvious if you look at the research and attachment. You can see that Mary Ainsworth's strange situation was applied without much thought in lots of different cultural contexts where it really was not appropriate. Heidi Keller came along some years later and started looking at that particular paradigm and realized it did not fit. So we have been looking much more carefully also in developmental psychology at the context and the importance of the context. We're seeing different methodologies develop. One of the methodologies that has come to the forefront, which we have borrowed from basically psychological anthropology, is the observational techniques that you will see, as well as qualitative studies. There are many of those coming in these days, and our associate editors are becoming quite skilled at managing those particular projects. So I see that there's going to be methodological change. There's a lot more attention these days to equivalence of measures, to the comparability of samples. And so I think you're going to see much more carefully conducted research in developmental and in cross-cultural. And when the two are married, I think we will find out a great deal more about how our cultures do arrive in people's lives. So thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
Happy anniversary, IACCP. My name is Michelle Gelfand, and I'm here to make a couple of remarks about our fabulous association, the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology, my academic home for many, many years. I first started attending IACCP in Montreal in 1996, and I've been regularly coming to the conferences ever since, serving as treasurer in the early 2000s. My metaphor for IACCP is a candy store. I find myself often hyperventilating about all the content across the discipline of the field of culture and psychology, eating up, to use the metaphor, all the fabulous content that we have to offer in our field. I also think about IACCP through the lens of being a home, an academic home and an extended family that I've made over the last 25 years. I feel so fortunate and grateful to have met so many people from all corners of the earth who share the same passions and are such amazing people and have become very close friends and collaborators over the years. I also want to take this chance to thank and propose a toast to one of the founders of IACCP, Harry Triandis, my academic advisor and my intellectual hero. Harry was an amazing mentor and colleague and friend. He taught me about the history of the field, the theoretical advances, and the methodological challenges that we all face on the ground doing cross-cultural research. Harry also taught me a lot about how to live a good life. His famous tripartite advice was to be passionate about what you do, to not be afraid to be controversial, but most importantly, Harry said, don't take yourself too seriously, which is something I think all of us are constantly challenged to do throughout our careers and lives. Harry also was a very generous person who opened up his house to all his students and colleagues who came through Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. We had the great luxury of going to his house throughout the years, and I distinctly remember the first day I went to Harry's house as a first-year grad student, he served me Schlitz beer, which for many of you, as you know, is not a terrifically tasting beer. But I actually told Harry, this is delicious, to be nice and grateful. And he served that beer for 5 years. And on my the last day of school, Harry's wife, Paula, said, you know, every time you came over, Harry would go and run out and get that great beer that you loved. And that was Harry, always thinking about others, always taking care of us, and something that we strive to do with our students and colleagues in Harry's spirit. Harry's with us all the time, in mind and heart, and we miss you so much. Thank you so much for attending our session, and hope to see you in July, where we'll be doing a Q&A online. And look forward to seeing everyone back in person, hopefully not in too distant of a future.
Hi, everybody. It's David Matsumoto from San Francisco State University. I am honored and humbled to be part of the panel of the Honorary Fellows for the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology and to provide this very brief remarks on the past, present, and future of cross-cultural psychology. The future of cross-cultural psychology is brighter than ever before, as long as, in my opinion, as long as that the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology is active and thriving as it has been with many, many passionate cross-cultural researchers for decades. The field will undoubtedly continue to evolve in terms of content, knowledge, theories, ideas, research methodologies, statistics. But instead of speculating on the nature of what that content evolution will be like, allow me to describe here why I think the field will continue to evolve brilliantly as long as IACCP is involved, as it has been until now. My thoughts are based upon what I perceive are the three unique features of IACCP. Number one, compassion. The IACCP as an organization, as well as its members, are compassionate. They care not only about the growth of the field, but also about each other. In today's academic world, being part of such a compassionate community of scholars, instead of the often apathetic and sometimes argumentative atmosphere that pervades other organizations, is refreshing. You and I know of other meetings or organizations or conventions that we could go to where people don't care or people are fighting. It doesn't happen here, and it starts at the top. It starts at the top of the leadership of this organization, some of whom have been here from the beginning, like John Berry and Walt Launer, and then so many others that have carried on that compassionate banner. Number two, respect. Each biennial convention and regional conference is fraught with ample scenes of respect among scholars across countries, cultures, languages, genders, academic rank, and any other kind of characteristic. Of course, we see that in the academic programs, but you see that most in the social programs, the opening ceremonies, the closing dinners, the tours and excursions where we just share time as individuals, not as professors and students, researchers or not, or whatever role we play in life. We are just sharing time in so many beautiful countries and cities around the world as individuals. Third, the mentorship. Mentorship is at the heart of IACCP, not only from its student programs and continuing education courses, but also in the stewardship of its well-established scholars and the review process of the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology. I remember the first time I submitted a manuscript to JCCP in the mid-'80s. And it could have been easily rejected. And the 80s by the time were, by the way, were a time of where reviews of articles and grants proposals were not happy things. They were contentious, sometimes demeaning. JCCP was never like that. They led me along the way. They taught me how to write, and they taught me how to publish. And I was very fortunate to take advantage of that system that exists today, I believe. Over the past 50 years of its existence, IACCP has gone through one of the hardest periods of the modern era in the last 2 or 3 years, and we have emerged more unified and stronger than ever before. As long as IACCP continues to thrive around these three pillars with all of our care and endeavor, the field of cross-cultural psychology is in great shape. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
Hi to all of you. My name is Ipe Poortinga. In the early days of IACCP, I have been organizer of a conference, Secretary General and President. Here you see my title page. Early IACCP tried to be inclusive. The Constitution specified regional representatives. There was an income-dependent fee structure. Beyond the Constitution and bylaws, travel grants and conference fee waivers for members from low-income countries were a must. When women felt underrepresented on the EC, amends were made on the spot. A member initiative to make research on minorities part of IACCP's agenda led a few years later to a regional European conference. Let me be clear, full equality on major diversity dimensions was never reached, and I can only hope that an old Latin saying applies. Good intentions deserve praise, even if capabilities fall short. I'd like to make 3 comments on early research. Hypotheses tended to refer to observable antecedents. In the Visual Illusions project, Siegel, Campbell, and Herskowitz included measures of the actual ecological context. And for the 6 culture studies on child rearing by the Whitings, movies were taken of to record the physical and social environment. Already in the 1970s, invariants, similarities, received less attention than differences. Notable is a limited attention for Charles Osgood's major project on connotative or affective meaning that reported only a few striking differences. Psychologists outside the West argued against parochialism of concepts and research topics. The need for indigenous psychologists was addressed insufficiently and has not been resolved so far. There have been later, in my view, questionable research developments. The tradition of cultural psychology that originated in the USA has a dominant focus on North America and East Asia, the East-West dichotomy, essentially shrinking our global world. And broad value dimensions, notably individualism, collectivism, trace differences in behavior to internal states and traits, but tend to ignore antecedents in current external context, poverty, social inequality, poor quality of formal education. Both developments are characterized by broad and sweeping interpretations of data that are hard to examine critically and that tend to persist even in the face of negative evidence. What would I do if I would start research today? With the emphasis on psychological dichotomies and with the replicability issues knocking on our door, cross-cultural psychology can be said to be facing a crisis. There is a fortunate side to this. A field of science that is not in some kind of crisis tends to be stagnant. Hopefully, the replicability crisis will urge us to make cross-cultural psychology more inclusive, not just by having cooperation in data collection, but by active participation of representatives of all target populations at all stages of a research project. After initial development, IACCP consolidated. Did this lead to some rustiness? Recently, there seems to be a push towards new opportunities for interaction and engagement that look refreshing and invigorating. For 5 decades, IACCP has provided a collegial base for many cross-cultural psychologists. I trust that this valuable niche will have a long future. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, my name is Peter Smith from the University of Sussex, and I'd like to focus my contribution to this set of short talks on the problem of measurement within cross-cultural psychology. For several decades past, we've been seeking valid ways of measuring differences between cultural groups, but we face some severe problems having to do with the achievement of measurement equivalence between groups. And one of the reasons why this is problematic is that cultural groups differ in their way of responding to measurement instruments, just as they differ in all the other ways that we spend our time trying to measure. So the question is, can we control for differences in response to measurement instruments without eliminating the effects that we actually, as cross-cultural psychologists, wish to study? There are 2 particular problems, maybe 3, which are relevant to the achievement of measurement equivalence. Measurement equivalence is going to be affected by translation errors, and we know of ways in which we can attempt to cope with those difficulties, and also by variations in response style, which is an area in which I've had particular interest over a couple of decades. Acquiescence, for example, is particularly favored in samples that endorse harmony and deference. And of course, that means that if we sample such cultures, these people are likely to agree more with opinion statements or statements of values or beliefs or personality
because that is their style of communication, which is normative within those particular cultural groups. So that's one issue that has to be addressed. Another problem is that initially, and indeed in a continuing way, a great many cross-cultural studies are done comparing two different samples, only two different samples. And there are so many confounds between the differences between two samples that it's very difficult to know why results come out differently from one cultural group rather than another, because there are lots and lots of differences between those two samples. And the way around that is to sample more samples. And although we need to do that, achieving equivalence becomes more and more difficult as the number of samples surveyed increases, because the mean differences between samples are themselves treated as indicating sample inequivalence when we use the conventionally applied tests of measurement equivalence. So what's the solution to this? Well, we could ignore the problem and continue to publish two sample comparisons with little or no checks on measurement equivalence. Or we could contribute to ensuring rejection of submitted articles that do not provide evidence of full measurement equivalent, particularly in mainstream journals. Or we could publish articles, and I'm on at least one occasion guilty of doing this myself, emphasizing the impossibility of achieving measurement equivalence. So how can we move forward? Well, we have to try to find ways of escaping from polarized debate. It's not a question of either measurement equivalence being impossible or only studies that have measurement equivalent being worth considering. It's a scale. All measurement involves some error, and the further we can move along that scale towards equivalence, the more worthwhile our studies become. So using Cronbach alpha is better than not using Cronbach alpha. Achieving partial measurement equivalent is better than not testing for it. And we need to find ways of moving in those directions. So that's the main point that I want to make. And I want to say that the argument is expressed in greater detail in the paper that Michael Bond and I have constructed for the anniversary Congress issue, which is issued in connection with the present Congress now going on. So thank you for your attention.
Kia ora. I'm Colleen Ward. As well as having the honor of being an honorary fellow, I've had the privilege and the pain of being the president of IACCP over the last 2 years. In my brief reflections today, I'd like to focus on our association rather than the discipline of cross-cultural psychology more broadly. And the theme I would like to address is what has been referred to in our executive council as dancing with politics. Now, this can encompass a wide range of questions and issues, such as where do we hold our conferences? Do we avoid places that we believe may be locations of human rights abuses? And it can also involve, does IACCP make political statements? To these ends, I'd like to focus on the war in Ukraine, where the EC has received a suggestion, some would say a demand, to make a statement condemning Russia and standing in solidarity with the Ukrainians. Without a doubt, the invasion of Ukraine, the unprovoked aggression, is a crime against humanity. It has unspeakable atrocities and horrendous consequences. But the question is, should IACCP have an official response? The executive considered this request and weighed it up against other considerations and questions before coming to a decision. Some of these questions included, what is the difference between a personal response to the war in Ukraine and an organizational one? What about our international membership? We are committed to the support of all of our members. Would a statement jeopardize the safety of some of our members in these circumstances? To make a statement about the war in Ukraine when IACCP has refused to make such statements in the past could also potentially lay us open to claims of Eurocentrism. Is this an important consideration? 3 million Syrian refugees, 1 million of whom came to Europe, went largely unnoticed by our organization. And then there's the question of where are the boundaries as to what we comment on and what we choose to ignore. If we comment on the war in Ukraine, where things are black and white, do we also comment on other issues such as Israel and Palestine? Do we talk about the racism and the poison in the Trump administration? Another consideration, a question, what practical good might a statement do? It may make us feel better as individuals in our organization, but does it deliver any tangible benefits to victims of war? And then very importantly, we had to address the issue of the practicality or the practical impossibility of generating a statement that would garner widespread endorsement within our organization. Consequently, the EC decided on a generic statement on peace. And if you look on our website, you can see this. It reads, IACCP condemns violence and promotes peaceful conduct. We are committed to the support of all of our members. Therefore, it is our policy to refrain from making political statements regarding any international or domestic conflict or atrocity. I think this was a good outcome. It was a result of extensive communication amongst EC members and the wider membership, multiple meetings, and a democratic process. But many of our members are bitterly discontent with this outcome. Dancing with politics is not going to go away. It's something our organization will continue to confront. And it's something that I believe will attract a lot of attention from our Honorary Fellows Symposium. I look forward to seeing you and hearing your views at our conference in July. Thanks very much.
So, Lucine, you'll run us through the next sequence, which involves brief reports from each of the facilitators and then open for general discussion. Is that the way it works?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. All right, I'll do my brief report and then we'll pass on to the next moderator. So we had Colleen Ward, which means that more than half of the discussion was about politics and how difficult it is to come to an agreement about how to engage with political issues. And we agreed that we will leave that topic for now and come back to it during the provocation session on Can Academia Be Apolitical, which we will be having on Thursday, 14th. But then we switched to discussing about the future of IACCP, and there were several really nice points made both by the Honorary Fellows and the participants, which are somewhat contradictory, somewhat not. So Walt said that when the journal was founded, the idea was that it might be a death wish, that the idea is that all of the psychology will become cross-cultural psychology. So we won't have the need to have a field in the journal for cross-cultural psychology because it will be diffused across all of the fields. That didn't happen, and maybe that's something that we still wish would happen, although I'm sure opinions would be different on that matter. And then trying to imagine the conference in 50 years, I really like this vision of bringing together all the different branches that work on similar issues, like the cross-cultural psychology crowd, the cultural psychology crowd, the indigenous psychology crowd, and having one huge conference, as Andrew Ryder said, with special appearances from anthropologists and sociologists and neuroscientists, et cetera, having a truly interdisciplinary and diverse exchange. And finally, there was a comment about the teaching of cross-cultural psychology, that this is something that we haven't gone as far as we would like to in that many psychology students graduate without knowing anything about culture and psychology, and that is another area where we want to do more and will need to do more, so that no one can graduate and get a psychology degree unless they know something about psychology and culture. So that's our group discussion, and maybe Vladimir, do you want to continue?
Sure. We had a very interesting discussion, and we began sort of piggybacking on Michael's Bohn's comment about the difference about culture, not on national level, but as a culture of families, of friendship groups, and of organization. We honorary fellows talking about traditional culture as a black box or an easy explanation for intergroup differences that are not explainable in other terms, and that the progress can be had with identifying our populations better, looking at differences between the rich and the poor, and so on. IPA emphasized the collaborative approach and its potential to improve our theory development, as our traditional model is basically having an idea and having other people collect data for us. And IPA's suggestion was to go more in the route of PISA, where the collaborating populations are deciding together on what are the constructs that are most relevant for them. Which David also brought up, that there is a conflict to be resolved between the push for publications and the intensification of all the cycles of academia and hiring and so on and so forth, and returning to the more old-fashioned kind of measurement and capturing actual behavior with work that is more effortful, but has been losing focus due to structural demands, which are not specific to IACCP itself, but will in some ways define the future of cross-cultural psychology as well. We also spoke about the ways in which we can transmit the IACCP culture to newer generations, and as has been brought up by us, that in the past two conferences and holding them online, the spirit that everybody knows and loves is difficult to communicate. We have to find ways and use the resources that we have, the social media, the website, and some sort of conference organization as well to transmit this approachability, democratic values that are behind the organization, to make sure that they survive into the next 50 years. That was our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds lovely. Okay, let's hear from Rachna.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Vladimir. So our group really started with concerns about how the Earth is going to look like in the next 50 years and whether we'll make it. And so a lot of very significant environmental concerns across the world. And I think the discussion really seamlessly flew into looking at the applied aspects of studying culture and strengthening local research efficiencies and qualities of the next generation of scholars who will actually start applying cultural knowledge in their local contexts. And interestingly, what came forward from a couple of people very strongly was also this field of developmental psychology, child development, and the study of contextual factors and culture, as well as the study of processes to look at what makes us different, although we start similarly. And so it's not just the study of similarities, but how do we become different that's going to be more important. Lastly, the textbooks that we are still using are culture blind in many ways. And if we can do something about that in different pockets of the world and bring those, the study materials have to be much more culture inclusive. And that would really make a big difference in the long run. And 50 years from now, we really don't know whether all these branches would exist or we would have one big gala event where everybody comes together and really puts culture at the center and the study of culture and development together. And so in Professor Bond's work, he would like to see culture wither away, and we should be looking at more contextual factors that make a difference to human beings and the developmental processes. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we had similar similar comments in our group as well. All right, and the last group, but not least, of course, Isabel.
Yeah, so we also had discussions about increasing interdisciplinarity in our group. So that there's a trend that more fields in psychology as well as outside, such as economics or neuroscience, are considering the importance of culture. And yeah, we discussed a little bit that maybe in the future, a lot of conferences will also be joint efforts or collaborations with other psychological societies, or also just very different fields that research similar topics, or can bring something to the table that can that both parties can profit from. So maybe that it's yeah, that it's a more interdisciplinary effort. And we also discussed the aspect of becoming more practice oriented or more policy oriented, that might also be a direction that more people go into, and that would also be a more prominent topic at conferences to evaluate policies or develop policies, or specific practices, interventions, all these kinds of things. And regarding topics that that might be especially important, definitely conflict resolution as a central topic, because we'll likely still be dealing with that, and potentially even in an increased numbers because of resource scarcity due to climate change and things like that. So conflict resolution was named as a central topic that might be important at the next anniversary conference, and also still the question of tackling measurement issues in large studies where we have many nations in one paper, especially since they seem to come up a bit more in other disciplines of psychology where people don't really have that cross-cultural background at all, and to bring these considerations into that more, find solutions for our own field, and also communicate these to others to not only be able to realize these large-scale studies where you don't only have two nations that you compare with each other, but actually do it in a good way and make sure that the measurements you're using actually say something.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. And I will now ask John to maybe, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm not sure if there is an opportunity for anyone to ask questions, but John, that's up to you if you want to give an opportunity or you want to do the closing remarks. So passing on to you.
We intended that there be a period of general discussion following the breakout sessions, and I still hope that we're able to do that. I will need some advice from the technical staff whether we can extend our period by whatever 10-15 minutes beyond the half-hour period where we were supposed to end. So can someone advise me on whether we can take more time? Well, in the absence of a veto, let's take some time for general discussion. We've had a very rich menu from the presenters. We did not stipulate what could be addressed by each presenter, other than to reflect on the association's past, present, and future, and the field in general in those same terms. And so we had a highly variable content that raised probably more issues than we expected to be raised. I won't attempt to summarize them, but instead let's hear from participants, of which we still have 54 online. And Lucine, maybe you could manage the chat function from your point of view for this general discussion. So
Yeah, I'll do that.
let's hear from everybody who's online. There are 7 in the chat, I see.
I think, Debbie, you also mentioned that there's another session where we can come back and have the more general discussion. That's on, I think, is that Friday? Just so that people
right.
know
There
about
is
it.
a joint question and answer session for the honorary fellows and the special issue symposium. And this will be a further opportunity for people to reflect and to raise issues. But we still can do that now for this symposium if you wish. Perhaps I could address one of the issues that arose in the 4 reports, and that is to get to understand specific features of the contexts of human development and behavior beyond the convenience of the nation state or the international survey, digging down into the lived experience. And I might give a reference to the upcoming special issue of the journal, in which my paper is called The Forgotten Field, in which I lay out 2 meanings of the field that we have forgotten. One is the broad life context that Levine called the field, and the other is the field work that many of us started doing in our earlier careers, but has become less and less frequent. And both of these are opportunities to avoid the simplistic identification of a group by simply naming it or calling it by a country, and getting right into the communities and lives of the people, because we cannot possibly understand or interpret the psychological data we collect unless we know where it's coming from. So that was the one issue that I heard across all of the 4 groups' reports.
Yeah, and how are we doing on that score then? What do you guys think? Are we elucidating the context? How are we elucidating the context? I've thought, for example, that one of the best case studies here and the cross-cultural research of the first decade was Michel's work on normative constraints that differ for public behavior across a number of different countries, which of course immediately bring us, as at least social psychologists, into an explanatory variable that we can begin to use to go behind the geographical locations that you were referring to, John, and look at the contextual driver, one of the contextual drivers for behavior. Are there other examples? I think there are far too few, frankly. Michelle, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point, because EB had talked about how, like, we in the US at least have kind of collapsed the complexity into East and West. But I think the field, and I think that's an important point. I think the field of cross-cultural psychology, though, also has had a collapse of complexity in terms of the explanatory variables. And I think mainly it's a kind kind of a sociology of science. I think we all felt so comfortable with collectivism because at least that sounds like something psychological, and we all jumped on that bandwagon. And we've been trying to expand, as you call it, the cultural toolkit. There's now much more work going on the psychology of honor, for example. Zeynep and I are doing some work now on the evil eye and other concepts that we don't know a lot about in psychology. But I do think that we need to, as a society, is help to encourage people to really broaden that cultural toolkit, because I think it's very easy for people who are coming into the field to feel concerned about mapping out new dimensions, and how much are we encouraging that? I think that's an important point, because I think our field also has a little bit of that collapse of complexity, as you might call it. So maybe that 50-year conference will have a lot more explanatory variables, and that we can help build that complexity back up again.
May I add one comment? The simplicity of the East-West kind of notion based on individualism, collectivism has been reigning true in many of the submissions we get in JCCP. But I had one this past week that would horrify all of you. It came from economists, not psychologists, but again, what we filter out into the world is my point. They have picked up the weird, non-weird notion. And this paper had 60 some countries in their study. They identified them as weird or non-weird and made the comparisons there. And they dichotomized them into the groups based on language. Whether they spoke English, they were weird. If they spoke Chinese, they were non-weird. Okay. I, of course, desk rejected it, but I just thought you would like to know how bad our field is seen elsewhere.
Weirder and weirder.
I thought it was a really interesting point someone mentioned around using cultural theory to understand our society, and particularly on cultural transmission. How do people who are coming into the field, how do they perceive the field itself? And how do we transmit the values? And what are the values of IACCP? What are the norms? Do we have an agreement on that? Maybe there's time to do a little bit of a cultural assessment of our own association, and also take the same theories we study, cultural transmission, cultural change. How do we think about that in terms of IACCP? How do we bring in the history of the field, but also innovate? These are classic questions. And I think our field is a little bit under threat, I would say. If I use again, what are the ecological conditions of our field? There's a lot of other subfields that are developing on cross-cultural studies. And so are we kind of celebrating that diversity in other fields and culture, or are we kind of becoming more inclusive? These are just questions, but I think it's a fascinating idea. We're supposedly experts on culture, so maybe we can use that to analyze our own association and, kind of think through, be culturally and be intentional about cultural change. As David Sloan Wilson, he's an evolutionary biologist, uses this term, like intentional cultural change. I see Colleen's like, I've done my work, I've had my year of pain, but I do think it's kind of fun to think about, because we can be really in charge of our cultural changes in IACCP in a very respectful and exciting way. So I would just put that on the agenda.
I think those are some really cool questions to keep discussing during the conference. By the way, we have the Gather Town, so if you want to chat with someone, you can also have a date on Gather Town and go and talk more about some specific unresolved issues that you need more time for. I just want to warn you all that I did get a notification from technical team saying that we are over time, and the next session will begin in 7 minutes. So we should probably give at least a 5-minute break to everyone to get a coffee or something. So John, maybe you can do closing remarks. So we have the break.
Well,
Thanks.
First of all, thanks to all of the people who presented and subsequently all of the people who participated with their observations and questions. And also, of course, to Lucine for coordinating a lot of the work in this session. I mentioned before that it's been a extremely variable feast because we didn't attempt to direct people towards particular topics, but I think we did discern some common themes, particularly the contextuality, the interdisciplinarity, the developmental, and the cultural aspects of our field, all of which I'm sure will continue as themes throughout the rest of the conference. A reminder once again that on Friday there will be an opportunity for Q&A for the 2 symposia that celebrate our 50th anniversary. And I would like to encourage everyone who is online or is not online at the moment to join us then. So thank you very much, everybody. I think it was a successful activity to launch the conference into the next 4 days of more specific discussions. Thank you very much once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.